So Luca Badetti, hopefully I'm saying that right, is a doctoral candidate in disability studies at the University of Illinois, Chicago. His work is focused on disability issues of community, self-determination, and inclusion. He brings together his rich interdisciplinary academic background, community experience, and research, his teaching and clinical work. These all allow him to approach disability holistically in its various dimensions and to serve persons with disabilities across multiple settings. Originally from Rome, Italy, Luca has obtained an MS in clinical psychology, a BA in communication arts and theology with minors in philosophy and mental health and human services, and he's an alumni of LEND, which is the Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental and Related Disabilities. He has research and teaching experience at the Institute for Disability and Human Development, and has provided mental health therapy to persons with intellectual disabilities at the Developmental Disabilities Family Clinics. He's a scientific community member of a disability studies book series and an advisory committee member of the Italian Journal of Disability Studies. He's qualified to give this talk. Throughout the years, Luca has been deeply involved with the large communities in which people with and without intellectual disabilities share life together in a spirit of friendship. After having been a live-in assistant in various US and European communities, he's currently the community coordinator for Large Chicago and co-chairs a National Inclusion Initiative. So with that being said, I'm going to let Luca talk about what he's going to talk about, so I can sit down and stop talking, and hand it over to him. So, Luca, thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for coming, first of all. It is great to see a good turnout, also considering it's been midterm season here. So as you were mentioning, I come from a different country. I've been here many years. And today we're going to enter together into a different country, which is disability. We might think that we know what disability is, but we will discover that it's something that we journey into and that we're never done discovering. So what happens when we go into a new country? What are some things that we do? First of all, we observe. We try to learn the language. We try to get a sense of what people are saying. We notice things. Look how they do things. Look what they say. Look how they move. Look what they eat. We get glimpses, but we never have a full understanding of a culture, do we? We get a sense, but we can't contain it into one framework. So tonight we're going to enter into disability. We're going to explore its different dimensions. But what I hope that is something that you will bring with you is more questions than answers about disability. So the talk will be divided into two different segments. The first segment is about accepting our disability and accepting the disability of others. Let's look at the words. Disability. Does anybody know what this means? This. It means lacking of. Okay? So disability is lacking of an ability. So really, if we're faithful to the word, aren't we all disabled? Aren't we all unable to do something? So I start with this understanding of disability. That disability is the place in us, within us, where we have a lack. And lack is great. Lack is great. we live in a culture that doesn't always say that lack is great. When we think about success, we often refer to having it all together or knowing how to do something. There is therefore a sense that our strengths is what define us. You see it in bookstores, in training programs, you know, the 7 ways to be effective and to be successful, you know, they're always numbered. But what I've come to discover is that lack is what makes us most human. Because when we have a lack, we can ask people to help us. We can come together. If we had it all together, if we were all able to do everything, we wouldn't need one another. In some way, the individualism in Western culture is kind of based on that assumption. Learn more, achieve more, you know. You can do it. And you can do it usually means you, individual, not you as a group. The second part of our talk will examine disability shortly across history. And we'll learn a bit why disability has been marginalized and rejected. So, we go back to lack. I just said that lack brings us together. I cannot do this, I need you. In some way, this is part of our human history. When we go back to prehistoric times, when we go back to the Neanderthal people, they've made an interesting discovery. This was made in the 1950s. They found graves, tombs of Neanderthal people. And amongst these tombs, there was one with a skeleton of a man who was in his around 40 years old. He lived about 100,000 years back. They realized that he lived in an impaired way. He didn't have an eye, he was crippled, and he couldn't feed himself. He couldn't go out and gather food. Now, you know, in primitive times, not being able to go out and get food was a problem. That's actually where the survival of the fittest mentality comes from. You know, just go out, feed yourself, and, you know, if you cannot do it, you basically die off. Well, but they found out that this wasn't the case when they found this skeleton. Some people met this with disbelief. They're like, that's not possible that they were doing that at those times. But then they found out other tombs, and they realized that there were people with disabilities back then, and then the group got food for them and took care of them. So this was a culture of care, not just a culture of survival. So instead of survival of the fittest, I like to think of survival of care, our ancestry of care in our own humanity. We know, though, that through history, this wasn't always the case with people with disabilities. They've often been rejected, they've often been oppressed, they've often been eliminated. We will talk about that a little more in just a bit. However, through time, there have been people, there have been families there have been groups that have taken a step towards welcoming people with disabilities rather than rejecting them. One of these groups started in the 1960s in France. This is when a Canadian philosopher named Jean Vanier visited an institution for people with intellectual disabilities. This was north of Paris in a small French town. As he walked through this institution, he heard a cry from people there. Do you want to be my friend? Am I important to you? Remember, these were people that were locked up in an institution. Jean was touched by this call, by these questions, and he decided to invite two of these people to live with him, to open up a house and live in community, away from the institutional walls, but in a family-style home. So the two people that he invited, their names were Raphael and Philippe. They started living together in a spirit of friendship. They cooked together, they worked together, they had a spiritual life that they shared together. What Jean realized is that their cry for friendship was his own cry. That it was a very basic human need to love and to be loved. People from around the world started to become interested in this new model of living disability and with disability, and they took large communities across the globe. I'm now involved with the large Chicago community. But there is two stories from L'Arche that I wanted to share with you tonight. People with disabilities in L'Arche are called core members. Core meaning heart, because they're at the heart of community. So I lived in one of the large homes with Jimmy, who is a man with Down syndrome. He was a very friendly guy and a lover of music. He loved country music and Celine Dion. So there was a lot of Celine going on Sunday mornings. I lived right across from him, so I could hear the whole soundtrack. He was very affectionate, and he really accepted and celebrated me. So one time I go out on vacation for a couple of weeks, and I come back to the home. It was called Gandhi House. I come back to the home, and Jimmy comes, gives me a hug, and asks me, "Did you miss me? Did you miss me?" Now, we usually have the courage to say, "I missed you." You know, when we are gone, we come back to our family, our friends, our loved ones, and we say, "I missed you." But can we be vulnerable enough to say, "Did you miss me?" Which basically means, am I important to you? Was it different here without me? That spoke to me very deeply. It brought me in touch with a vulnerable place, not only that he had, but that I had. The second story that comes to my mind is with Mike, who is a core member here at L'Arche Chicago. And when I asked him about, what disability meant to him, he said, disability is something good. It is something not to fear. That's how I was made. I like myself. Speaking of self-acceptance, that's the way I was made, with a disability, and I'm proud to be who I am. I like myself. So what I learned in large by being close to people with disabilities is to accept people and to accept my own vulnerability, my own need, and the fact that it's okay that I don't have it all together. In some way, this is an encounter that happens in community. There was an existentialist philosopher, Martin Buber, that spoke about encounter. How do we meet the world? How do we meet people? He says there are two main ways in which we can encounter people. I and thou, me and you, by which we meet people in their uniqueness, in their personhood. Tell me your story. Tell me where you come from. And in the relationship, we are changed. Because relationships affect us. If you had a child, if you have ever been in love, you probably know that relationship influences you. Your thoughts, your desires, your wants. The second way is I and it. That's when we meet the world and people as an object, according to our own labels, according to our categories. So in this case, in the case of disability, we can either meet people as a it. Oh, well, you have a disability, so, of course, this means that, your IQ is low and you cannot do these things, etc. According to our frameworks. Or we can meet people as a thou, as a you. You are unique, you have your story. You have your abilities, you have your disabilities. I want to know what they are. So this is where community is, in meeting people through relationship. Society, however, treats disability as an it, as an object. People with disabilities, that's a big group, it's a big label. How was this label formed? Think about these words. Language always says a lot about a culture. Think about these words. That joke was lame. That event had a crippling effect on me. That's retarded. Okay. What does this say? These terms that are often employed, what does it say about disability? It says that it's bad and sad. These are not positive connotations. I say that joke was lame, that had a crippling effect on me, but that's retarded, that's not positive. Actually, it's interesting also when people imply that disability is necessarily painful. This person is confined to a wheelchair. I mean, confined to a wheelchair, that's like being in prison. Or that person suffers from Down syndrome. And maybe that person with Down syndrome is happy. It's not suffering from Down syndrome. But the language we employ emphasizes this point of bad and sad. A look at history kind of makes this come alive. In Greco-Roman times, so Greek and Roman civilization, infanticide was advocated for people with disabilities, people with impairments. Aristotle proposed that he advocated for a law saying that no deformed child should live. Disability was also seen as a punishment from angry gods. Basically, the gods are angry. Too bad for you. You get a disability. With the advent of Judaism and Christianity, infanticide was prohibited. And there was an emphasis towards caring for people with disabilities. Towards the Middle Ages, people with disabilities were used as a spectacle for public entertainment. In fairs, they were displayed in villages, in fairs, and people kind of looked at them with amusement. We then have the scientific revolution and Enlightenment. During this time, we have Descartes, who emphasizes reason over unreason, the power of the mind. Disabilities were also began to be diagnosed. This is a time in which the first medical classification of mental disorders was created in the late 1800s. So abnormality became something to be diagnosed and cured. Actually, towards the end of the century, then you also had industrialization. If you were not able to work, you would basically be left out of social progress, which brings into question the role of the economic systems in disabling people and excluding them. Anyway, in the 19th century, statistics grows. Maybe some of you know something about statistics. It can be very useful. But for the first time, at first statistics started to study policies related to civic life in the state. But for the first time, Quetelet, who was a French astronomer and statistician, used statistics to study human characteristics. Height, things like that. And what happens when you put statistics to study human characteristics is that you have a bell curve, right? This is the average right here on top. So if we put together all the characteristics, heights, weight, whatever, of people in this country, we will get an average. What happened? It happened that the average became the ideal. when you see somebody who's very tall, oh wow, you're so tall. Or somebody who might be a little person. You see, we think that the average is the norm, is the ideal. And thus, that's what Leonard Davis calls the tyranny of normalization. Average equals normal, it equals ideal. This is a bit different from the classic idea of the ideal. You know, we see in classic times, you know, Venus, for example, you know, this body, and you know, that at the time was considered sort of ideal and perfect. But it was never meant to be something that the general population would aspire to. You know, these people were close to the gods, and you know, it was sort of a very idealistic image. Everyone fell short of it. But with this, a few people fall short. A few people that are not included in that average that we were talking about. With the 20th century, statistics was also used to find people's IQ. It was used to measure intelligence. This has been, you know, used to classify disability. Notice one thing here. This has been performed by professionals, right? Of course we need doctors, of course we need statisticians. But people with disabilities were not really involved in any of this. They were labeled by others. Others told them that your IQ is this low, well, guess what, you have a disability. You're different, you're not in the average, you're here. Of course, throughout this time, some people with disabilities sometimes were kept in the homes with the families, sometimes in poor houses. Sometimes they were closed up in institutions. What happens in the 1960s? Well, you probably heard of the civil rights movements, you know, in the speaking about 50s, 60s, the civil rights movement of women, of blacks. But there was also a civil rights movement of people with disabilities that is still continuing to this day. So the debate or the discussion has kind of switched from disability is poor and sad to I'm proud to be disabled. Pride. As a person with disability, I have rights that everyone else does. I am a citizen like everyone else is. So you notice how the conversation has been shifted. However, as one researcher noted, people with disabilities still tend to be outside looking in. I'm thinking especially of people with intellectual disabilities. Where are they? Where are they? I live in a community, so I see them, I enjoy living with them. But they're away from the places where culture is made. Their experience is not asked for. Their expertise is not sought. Which is very interesting because they can be those people that can help us and our society grow into humanity. Which means it's okay if your reasoning or your intellectual disabilities are not perfect. But we can relate at the level of the heart, where I can say, I need you and you need me. We come together beyond walls. So people with disabilities are still outside looking in. Yes, there has been a great advance that has been made towards including them more. All right, sometimes you see them in supermarket putting things in the bags, etc., which is nice. But the richness of their having a disability is not necessarily recognized. Which is very interesting. If I told you, oftentimes when I say that I study disability or that I share life with people with disabilities, what I hear is, that's nice. Yeah, it is, okay, great. But if I said, I work to end racism, that's right. I work for less discrimination towards women, that's right, that's the right thing to do. But with disability, that's right, that's nice. Hopefully with time, people will recognize that it's right to include people with disabilities at the center and to share life together in whatever ways we can, of course. Not everyone is to join in an intentional community or the like, of course. It's interesting, still today, a lot of the discourse around disability, if we see movies or commercials or stuff, that's very interesting. People with disabilities are often seen as little angels. I often hear people say that, oh, they're always happy. People with Down syndrome are always happy. No. I had one that was about to throw a chair at me once because he was upset. They're people just like you and me. They're not little angels. The other extreme is to see them as animals, which kind of happens unconsciously to some people. Look, they cannot even eat for themselves. That's so sad. But people with disabilities are neither angels nor animals. They're people. Like you and me. So it's very interesting to hear where discourses go, where culture is going, and to encourage it, to have people with disabilities right at the center, because they remind us of what it means to be human. They remind us that we don't have it all together, but that it's okay if we are together beyond walls. Thank you.